October 14th, 1943, the day everything changed. 25,000 feet above the German heartland, the temperature reads -40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the cramped tail section of a B-17G Flying Fortress nicknamed Lucky Lady, Staff Sergeant Michael Romano crouches behind twin 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns. Each weapon weighs 84 pounds, more than half his body weight, and he must wrestle them through their limited arc of fire while kneeling on what amounts to a modified bicycle seat. Through the small plexiglass window that separates him from the lethal cold outside, Romano watches death approaching at a combined closing speed of over 500 miles per hour. A Focke-Wulf 190, its radial engine snarling, positions for an attack run from 6 o'clock low, the bomber's most vulnerable angle. The German pilot knows exactly what he's doing. He's done this before. Romano squints through his ring and bead sight, a primitive aiming system that hasn't fundamentally changed since World War I. It's essentially two metal posts he must align with his target. No compensation for speed, no calculation for deflection, no help whatsoever in solving the complex trigonometry of aerial gunnery. He depresses the butterfly triggers. The guns roar, shaking his entire body. Tracers arc harmlessly behind the diving fighter. Missing by yards, the FW-190's cannons flash. 20-millimeter shells, each the size of a man's thumb, tear through Lucky Lady's aluminum skin like it's tissue paper. The No. 3 engine erupts in flames. Shrapnel peppers the fuselage. Someone screams over the intercom. Romano keeps firing, burning through ammunition in desperate bursts, achieving nothing but noise and recoil. This scene, this failure, repeats itself 291 times on October 14th, 1943. Across what history will remember as the Second Schweinfurt Raid. The 8th Air Force has dispatched 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses deep into Germany without fighter escort, relying on the bomber's defensive armament to protect them. By nightfall, 60 bombers, more than 20% of the attacking force, will be shot down. Another 138 return so badly damaged they'll never fly again. 600 American airmen are dead or dying in German fields. The mathematics are brutal and unsustainable. At this loss rate, no bomber crew will statistically survive their required 25 missions. The life expectancy of a B-17 crew member has dropped to just 11 missions. They might as well be playing Russian roulette with slightly better odds. The anatomy of failure. Post-mission analysis at 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe, England, reveals the grim truth that every tail gunner already knows. Despite being the bomber's last line of defense against the Luftwaffe's preferred attack angle, tail gunners achieve hit rates below 8%. Some studies suggest the actual rate is closer to 6%. Fighter pilots need merely endure a few seconds of inaccurate return fire before methodically destroying America's billion-dollar strategic bombing campaign, one flying fortress at a time. The defensive armament that was supposed to make the B-17 a flying fortress has failed catastrophically. Boeing's engineers had bristled the bomber with machine guns, up to 1350 caliber weapons on the latest G models, creating theoretical overlapping fields of fire. Army Air Force's promotional materials called it a flying battleship, capable of defending itself without fighter escort. Reality has proven brutally different. Senior commanders gather in smoke-filled briefing rooms, poring over lost statistics that would be court-martial offenses if they were corporate quarterly reports. General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, faces impossible choices. Cancel daylight precision bombing and admit defeat. Continue losing 60 aircraft per mission until none remain. Wait for long-range fighter escorts that won't arrive until 1944. What these generals and colonels don't know is that at that very moment, on a cold, hard stand at Bassingbourn Airfield, Cambridgeshire, a 22-year-old tail gunner with barely a high school education is sketching a design in his battered logbook. It's a design that violates multiple Army Air Force's regulations, a design that weapons engineers will initially declare mechanically impossible, a design that will eventually triple tailgun accuracy and save thousands of American lives. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Michael Romano, factory worker, high school dropout, and unlikely genius who refused to accept that American bomber crews had to die for want of adequate gun sights. It's the story of the innovation they tried to ban, and the gunner who refused to stop tinkering even when threatened with court-martial. The impossible problem. To understand why Romano's innovation proved so revolutionary, we must first understand the impossible problem tail gunners faced in 1943. The B-17's defensive philosophy was borrowed wholesale from naval warfare, bristle with enough guns to create overlapping fields of fire, making attack from any angle theoretically suicidal for enemy fighters. What worked for battleships at sea, the theory went, should work for battleships in the air. The tail gunner position was considered so critical that Boeing engineers had completely redesigned the B-17's rear fuselage between the E and F models, adding the now iconic tail gun position. Previous models had featured a single .50 caliber weapon fired through a small opening. The new design incorporated twin .50 caliber M2 Brownings on a ball mount, giving the gunner greater firepower and field of fire. But there was a problem. Several problems, actually. The tail gunner position was barely larger than a coffin. The gunner had to kneel on a padded bicycle seat, feet braced against the aircraft's structure, wrestling nearly 170 pounds of weapons and mount through their firing arc. At 25,000 feet, wearing heated suit, flak vest, parachute harness, and oxygen mask, even small movements required enormous effort. The aiming system was primitive, a ring and bead sight similar to those found on infantry rifles. To hit a fighter aircraft approaching at 300 miles per hour, while his own platform moved at 180 miles per hour, the gunner had to estimate the target speed relative to his own aircraft, calculate deflection, how far to lead the target, compensate for bullet drop over distance, account for parallax between his sight and gun barrels, factor in wind drift at altitude, execute all calculations instantly while under fire, physically manhandle the guns to track the target, expert gunners from peacetime aerial gunnery schools, firing at towed target sleeves under controlled conditions, achieved hit rates of perhaps 12%. In combat, stressed, oxygen-deprived, cold, and under fire, actual hit rates plummeted. The Luftwaffe quickly recognized this vulnerability. Evolution of death, German fighter tactics. Throughout 1942 and early 1943, Luftwaffe fighter tactics evolved with deadly efficiency. Initially, German pilots attacked from various angles, Probing for weaknesses in the B-17's defensive scheme, they quickly identified the tail position as the bomber's Achilles heel. The preferred attack profile became devastatingly simple. Approach from 6 o'clock level or slightly low. Accept 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate tail gun fire, close to 200 yards, and unleash devastating 20mm cannon strikes. A single 20mm shell could tear a basketball-sized hole in aluminum. A burst of such shells could sever control cables, shred control surfaces, or kill crew members. Luftwaffe training manuals from 1943 describe B-17 tail positions as marginally dangerous, accuracy insufficient to deter determined attacks. Experienced German pilots like Georg Peter Eder and Heinz Knoke perfected the tail attack, some claiming dozens of flying fortresses destroyed using this method. The Americans knew they had a problem. 8th Air Force loss rates were unsustainable. August 17, 1943. 1st Schweinfurt, 60 bombers lost. September 6, 1943. Stuttgart, 45 bombers lost. October 8, 1943. Bremen, 30 bombers lost. October 10, 1943. Münster, 30 bombers lost. October 14, 1943. 2nd Schweinfurt, 60 bombers lost. The 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging bombers faster than American factories could replace them. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, received casualty reports in Washington that made him question whether daylight bombing remained viable. Something had to change, or the entire strategic bombing campaign would collapse. The factory kid from Pittsburgh, Staff Sergeant Michael Angelo Romano, possessed exactly 0 qualifications for weapons engineering, at least on paper. Born in Pittsburgh's Strip District on March 15, 1921, Romano was the third of 5 children in a working-class Italian-American family. His father worked in the Jones and Laughlin steel mills. His mother took in washing. The family lived in a 2-room tenement that smelled perpetually of coal smoke and cabbage. Romano dropped out of McKinley High School at 16, not from lack of intelligence, but economic necessity. His father had been injured in a mill accident, his back crushed between 2 steel beams. With the primary breadwinner disabled, young Michael found work at the Hazelton Wire Rope Company, operating machines that braided steel cables for construction projects. The work was dangerous and monotonous, but Romano discovered he had a gift. When machines broke, which was often, he could visualize their internal mechanisms, understanding intuitively how components should interact. He began suggesting modifications to increase efficiency or reduce breakdowns. The floor supervisor, impressed by the kid's natural mechanical aptitude, moved him to the maintenance crew, despite his lack of formal training. For 3 years, Romano repaired machinery, rebuilt components, and learned practical engineering through trial and error rather than textbooks. He developed a philosophy that would later save lives. If something doesn't work right and people are getting hurt because of it, you don't wait for permission to fix it. You fix it. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Romano tried to enlist in the Navy. He'd always dreamed of seeing the ocean. The Navy rejected him for color blindness. The Army initially classified him for infantry, but a clerical error during processing at the new Cumberland Army Depot redirected him to the Army Air Forces. At 5 feet 7 inches and 145 pounds, Romano was small enough to fit in the tail gunner position that larger recruits couldn't squeeze into. The Army sent him to aerial gunnery school at Harlingen, Texas, where he scored average marks in marksmanship and aircraft recognition. His instructors noted adequate trigger discipline and satisfactory mechanical aptitude. Nobody identified him as exceptional, but Romano possessed one trait his training records didn't capture. He pathologically could not accept systems that didn't work. When something was broken, he felt compelled, almost physically compelled, to fix it. This compulsion would soon collide with Army regulations in spectacular fashion. First combat, the education of a tail gunner. Romano arrived at Bassingbourn Airfield, home of the 91st Bombardment Group, in August 1943 as a replacement gunner. The 91st was already famous, or infamous, for its losses. They'd been the first bomb group to attack Berlin, the first to complete 100 missions, and statistically, the most likely to get a replacement killed. He was assigned to Lieutenant James Holbrook's crew aboard a B-17F nicknamed Knockout Dropper, a name that would prove unfortunately prophetic. His first mission briefing came on August 19, 1943. Target, Gilzey Region Airfield in the occupied Netherlands. It was supposed to be a milk run, a relatively easy mission to break in new crews. Romano squeezed into the tail position before dawn, checking his guns, adjusting his sight, testing the intercom. The space was impossibly cramped. His knees pressed against metal padding, his head barely cleared the upper turret ring, and the guns dominated everything. When he moved them left, his whole body had to shift right to compensate. It was like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while trapped in a phone booth. They took off at 06:30, joining a formation of 106 bombers. Romano had never seen anything like it, flying fortresses stretching to the horizon, each carrying 10 men and 8,000 pounds of bombs. He felt part of something immense and unstoppable. That feeling lasted until they crossed the enemy coast. The first fighters appeared as specks against the sun, FW-190s, climbing from Schiphol. Romano tracked one through his ring sight, trying to judge deflection as instructors had taught. The fighter rolled, inverted, and dove. Romano fired, walking his tracers toward the target. Every round missed. The German pilot flashed beneath the bomber, pulled up, and raked another fortress with cannon fire. It folded like paper and fell. 3 times Romano engaged fighters. 3 times he missed entirely. He burned through 480 rounds of ammunition without scoring a single hit. Meanwhile, 2 bombers from his squadron went down. 20 men. Some of them he'd eaten breakfast with that morning. After landing, Romano stayed on the hard stand, staring at his guns. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the physical exhaustion of manhandling 168 pounds of weapons through sustained combat while kneeling at altitude. Everything hurt. His knees were bruised. His shoulders screamed. His hands were cramped into claws from gripping the spade handles. But worse than the physical pain was the mental anguish. He'd failed. His job was to protect the aircraft, and he'd achieved nothing but noise and spent brass. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the tracers arcing uselessly past German fighters, seeing those fighters pour cannon fire into neighboring fortresses, seeing young men like himself tumbling through space. The birth of an idea. Over the next 4 missions, Romano's frustration grew. He tried everything instructors had taught: Kentucky windage, tracking through the target, firing where the fighter would be, rather than where it was. Nothing worked. His hit rate remained essentially zero. On his 5th mission, Frankfurt, October 4th, his best friend died. Staff Sergeant Tony Benedetti had grown up 3 blocks from Romano in Pittsburgh. They'd enlisted together, trained together, and ended up in the same bomb group by pure chance. Benedetti was a tail gunner on Heaven Can Wait, flying off Romano's left wing. Romano watched a Bf-109 bore in from 6 o'clock on Benedetti's aircraft. He could see Tony firing, see the tracers missing, see the German pilot holding steady. The 109's cannons flashed. Heaven Can Wait's tail section exploded. Tony Benedetti, age 22, ceased to exist. That night, Romano walked to the aircraft revetment carrying a flashlight and his logbook. He climbed into the tail section, still stinking of cordite and hydraulic fluid, and stared at the ring and bead sight that had failed him again. He needed to understand why he couldn't hit anything. What was he doing wrong? What was everyone doing wrong? The moment of insight came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a simple observation. Romano noticed his reflection in the curved plexiglass window. The distortion created by the curve meant he could see angles behind the aircraft that his straight-line sight couldn't cover. He could see his own vertical stabilizer in the reflection. He could see along the fuselage. He started sketching. What if he could watch his tracer stream in real time, not just through the narrow view of his sight, but from multiple angles? What if he could see where his bullets were actually going, not where he thought they should go? The ring and bead sight forced him to look at one tiny point in space. What if he could expand his field of view? Then came the crucial leap. What if he combined mirrors with some sort of reflector sight, a piece of glass or clear material with an aiming reticle that seemed to float in space? Fighter aircraft used reflector sights. He'd seen them in P-47s on the field. The illuminated reticle appeared to hover at infinity, letting pilots track targets naturally, but those sights were designed for fixed, forward-firing guns, not flexible tail positions. Romano sketched frantically. Small mirrors positioned at specific angles could show tracer paths. A modified reflector sight could provide an aiming reference that moved with the guns. Combined, they might let him see both where he was aiming and where his bullets were actually going, real-time feedback for fire correction. It wasn't a true computing gun sight like the sophisticated gyroscopic systems beginning to appear in some fighters. It wasn't even particularly elegant, but it might work. And more importantly, he could build it himself, using salvaged parts. By dawn, he had detailed drawings covering 6 pages of his logbook. He also had a problem. His design violated Army Air Force's Technical Order 00025-122, which explicitly prohibited unauthorized modifications to defensive armament. Installing it without approval could result in court-martial, reduction in rank, even stockade time. Romano looked at his sketches, then thought about Tony Benedetti tumbling through the sky over Frankfurt. The decision took less than a second. Regulations be damned. Men were dying. The conspirators. Romano found his co-conspirator eating powdered eggs in the sergeant's mess. Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman looked like everyone's favorite uncle, 38 years old, graying at the temples, with the solid build of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. Before the war, he'd been a tool and die maker at Ford's River Rouge plant. He knew metal the way some men knew women. "Frank," Romano said, sliding his sketches across the table, "I need your help with something." Kellerman studied the drawings while chewing methodically. His expression didn't change, but Romano saw his eyes narrow slightly, the look of a craftsman evaluating blueprints. "This is for the tail guns," Kellerman stated. Not a question. "Yeah." "This is illegal." "Yeah." Kellerman took another bite of eggs, still studying the sketches. "This violates about 6 different technical orders. Modifying defensive armament without authorization from Wright Field, using non-standard components, altering factory specifications." He looked up. "They could bust you down to private. Hell, they could court-martial both of us." Romano met his gaze steadily. "Tony Benedetti's dead. Shot down 3 days ago because neither of us could hit the fighter that killed him. How many more are going to die while we wait for official channels?" Kellerman was quiet for a long moment, then he folded the sketches carefully and tucked them into his shirt pocket. "When do you fly again?" "Tomorrow. Münster." "Then we'd better work fast. Meet me in Hangar 3 after midnight. And Mike?" Kellerman's expression was deadly serious. "Tell no one. Not your pilot, not your crew chief, nobody. If this works, we'll worry about regulations. If it doesn't, no point in both of us getting busted." They began their illegal modification at 0030 hours on October 8, 1943, in a corner of the maintenance hangar screened off by canvas tarps. Kellerman had requisitioned components from the base salvage yard, a charitable term for midnight scavenging. The base of their modification came from a P-47 Thunderbolt that had belly landed 2 weeks prior. The fighter's reflector gun sight was undamaged, still in its mounting cradle. "This is designed for fixed guns," Kellerman explained, removing the sight assembly with practiced efficiency. "Mounting it on a flexible position is going to be tricky. The sight has to move with your guns while maintaining alignment." They worked through the night, fabricating brackets from aluminum sheet stock, drilling mounting holes, test-fitting components. The mirror system proved even more challenging. Romano wanted 3 small convex mirrors positioned to give him peripheral vision of his tracer streams without blocking forward view. Kellerman salvaged mirrors from a wrecked B-24's navigator station, cutting them down with a glass cutter borrowed from the base hospital. "The angles have to be precise," Romano insisted, holding a mirror while Kellerman marked mounting points. "Too shallow, and I can't see the tracers. Too steep, and they block my view of the target." They used ball socket joints from control linkages to make the mirrors adjustable. Each mirror was mounted on a bracket that could pivot and lock. It was crude, held together with aircraft bolts and safety wire, but it was adjustable and sturdy enough to withstand combat vibration. By 0400 hours, they had a working prototype. Kellerman looked exhausted but satisfied. "Let's install it." They wheeled their tool cart across the darkened airfield to knock out Dropper's hard stand. The B-17 loomed against the stars, moisture beading on its olive-drab skin. They climbed into the tail section, working by shielded flashlight. Installation took 2 more hours. The reflector sight mounted to the gun yoke via a welded bracket that would have horrified Boeing engineers. The mirrors attached to the fuselage structure with drilled aluminum plates. Everything was safety wired. If something came loose in combat, it could jam the guns or injure Romano. As dawn grayed the eastern horizon, Kellerman made final adjustments. "That's it. Best we can do with the time we have." He looked at Romano seriously. "This contraption might not work. Hell, it might make things worse. You sure about this?" Romano thought about Tony Benedetti, about all the tail gunners who died failing to hit attacking fighters. "I'm sure." "Then good luck, Mike. Try not to get killed testing it." "Frank?" Romano called as Kellerman gathered his tools. "Why are you risking your stripes for this?" The older man paused. "Because I've got 2 sons in the infantry. If someone over there has an idea that might keep them alive, I hope to God they've got a sergeant willing to break some rules to try it." He shouldered his tool bag. "Besides, I always hated bureaucrats who think their paperwork matters more than men's lives." First Blood, The Proving Ground, October 8, 1943. Target, Bremen U-boat yards. Romano attended the morning briefing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The route map showed their path deep into Germany. Luftwaffe fighters would have plenty of time to intercept. Perfect testing conditions for his modification, assuming he survived long enough to test it. His pilot, Lieutenant Holbrook, noticed nothing unusual during pre-flight inspection. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Donald Pierce, was busy with an oil leak in No. 2 engine. Nobody looked closely at the tail guns. Romano climbed into his position, settling onto the bicycle seat, checking the new sight system. The reflector sight glowed softly, its reticle seeming to float in midair beyond the guns. The mirrors provided strange peripheral views. He could see along both sides of the fuselage and watch his gun barrel's orientation. It was disorienting at first, like trying to process multiple television screens simultaneously. They took off at 0730, joining a stream of bombers climbing into the dawn. The formation shaped up over East Anglia, 336 B-17s in massive combat boxes, each group carefully positioned to provide mutual defensive fire. In theory, the first test came over the Dutch coast. An FW-190 rolled in from 7 o'clock high, not Romano's preferred angle, but within his field of fire. He tracked the fighter through the reflector sight, the glowing reticle sliding smoothly across the sky. The German pilot nosed down, beginning his attack run. Romano fired a short burst. In his peripheral vision, the mirrors showed his tracers passing behind the fighter. Without moving his eyes from the reflector sight, he could see exactly how much he'd misjudged the deflection. He adjusted, leading more dramatically, and fired again. This time, the tracers converged on the FW-190. Pieces flew off its wing root. The fighter rolled violently and dove away, streaming smoke. Not a kill, but he'd scored hits, actual hits. After 5 missions of futility, he'd finally drawn blood. "Tail gunner to crew," he called over the intercom, trying to keep the elation from his voice. "Damaged one FW-190, breaking away, trailing smoke." "Good shooting, Romano," Holbrook replied. "Keep 'em honest back there." The real test came an hour later over Germany. The Luftwaffe arrived in force. 60 fighters working in coordinated attacks. Romano watched in Me-109 positioning for a classic 6 o'clock level run. This was it, the exact scenario he'd designed the system for. The 109 pilot was good, jinxing slightly as he approached, making himself a difficult target. But Romano could now see something he'd never seen before, the relationship between his aiming point and where his bullets actually went. The reflector sight gave him a consistent reference. The mirrors showed him real-time results. He fired a long burst, watching tracers in the mirrors, adjusting as he fired. The streams of bullets walked across the 109's nose. The engine exploded in a gout of flame and black smoke. The fighter's canopy flew off, the pilot ejecting, and the aircraft nosed straight down, burning. Tail gunner, confirmed kill. 109 going down in flames. The intercom erupted in cheers, but Romano was already tracking another target. A second 109 approached from 6 o'clock low, cannon flashing. Romano centered the reflector reticle, checked his mirror reference, and fired. The fighter's wing root erupted. It cartwheeled wildly and disappeared below. Tail gunner, another one. Confirmed kill on second 109. In 12 minutes of combat, Romano fired 380 rounds and achieved 2 confirmed kills, plus 1 damaged. His hit rate had jumped from essentially 0 to over 20%. The mirrors and reflector sight had transformed him from a statistical liability to a lethal defensive weapon. But his elation was short-lived. As knockout dropper touched down at Bassingbourn that afternoon, Romano could see the crew chief waiting with a clipboard and a grim expression. Word of his unauthorized modification was about to reach official channels. The court-martial that wasn't Master Sergeant Donald Pierce had served as a crew chief since 1940. He'd seen every kind of damage, every type of field modification, every creative interpretation of regulations. But when he climbed into knockout dropper's tail section for post-flight inspection, he stopped cold. What in the holy hell is this? The mirrors caught afternoon sunlight. The reflector sight, clearly salvaged from a fighter, perched atop the gun mount like a transplanted organ. Safety wire held everything together in a decidedly non-standard configuration. Pierce had seen field modifications before, but nothing this extensive on defensive armament. He found Romano in the debriefing hut. Sergeant Romano, you want to explain the junkyard you've installed in my aircraft's tail? Romano met his gaze. It's a improved sighting system, Sergeant. It works. It works? Pierce's voice rose. Son, do you have any idea how many regulations you've violated? This isn't some hot rod you're tinkering with in your garage. This is a United States Army Air Force's combat aircraft. The confrontation quickly escalated. Within an hour, Captain Richard Voss, the 324th Squadron's armament officer, arrived at the hard stand. A West Point graduate with a peacetime engineering degree, Voss represented everything Romano wasn't. Educated, by the book, and utterly inflexible about regulations. Sergeant Romano, Voss said, his voice tight with controlled fury, would you care to explain the unauthorized equipment installed in your gun position? Romano stood at attention. Sir, I installed an improved sighting system. You installed what? Voss's composure cracked slightly. Do you have any comprehension of the regulations you violated? Technical Order 0025122 explicitly prohibits unauthorized modifications to defensive armament. This isn't a suggestion, Sergeant. It's a direct order from the highest levels of the Army Air Forces. Sir, the system works. I shot down 2. I don't care if you shot down Goering himself. Voss's face reddened. This equipment is not Army Air Forces standard. It's not Boeing approved. It hasn't undergone testing protocols. For all we know, it could fail catastrophically in combat, jamming your guns and leaving your aircraft defenseless. Romano's pilot, Lieutenant Holbrook, had been listening from nearby. Now he stepped forward. Captain, with respect, my tail gunner got his first kills today using that sight. 2 confirmed 109s. Maybe we should... Your opinion is noted, Lieutenant. Voss cut him off. The modification will be removed immediately. That's final. But word of Romano's success had already spread through the squadron. By evening mess, every gunner on base knew about the Romano rig, the jerry-built sight system that had produced 2 confirmed kills in a single mission. A cluster of tail gunners surrounded Romano's table, firing questions. How hard is it to install? Where'd you get the reflector sight? Can the mirrors handle the slipstream? Could you build one for my ship? Technical Sergeant Arthur Gleason, a tail gunner with 20 missions under his belt, voiced what many were thinking. Mike, I've fired thousands of rounds at fighters, hit maybe 2, damaged a few more. You're telling me some mirrors and a fighter sight made that much difference? The mirrors let you see where your tracers are actually going, Romano explained, sketching on a napkin. The reflector sight gives you a consistent aiming point that moves with the guns. Together, you can walk your fire onto target in real time instead of guessing at deflection. Bullshit, another gunner interjected. If it was that simple, Boeing would have thought of it. Frank Kellerman, eating quietly nearby, finally spoke up. Boeing designs aircraft for mass production. They use components that can be manufactured by the thousands and installed by semi-skilled workers. Mike's system uses salvaged parts fitted by hand. Boeing could never build it efficiently, so they never tried it. The debate intensified. Some gunners dismissed the modification as dangerous tinkering. Others wanted Romano to install similar systems immediately. The controversy reached the squadron operations officers, then the group headquarters. By 2100 hours, it had become a full-blown crisis of authority. The Colonel's Dilemma. Colonel Stanley T. Ray, commanding officer of the 91st Bombardment Group, faced an impossible situation. At 53, Ray was old for a combat commander. He'd flown DH-4s in France during the First World War, survived the interwar years of military neglect, and now commanded one of the 8th Air Force's most bloodied bomb groups. Ray understood regulations. He'd spent 30 years following them, enforcing them, living by them. But he also understood mathematics. His group was losing aircraft at an unsustainable rate. Tail gunners, supposedly the bomber's last line of defense, achieved hit rates that made their positions barely more than psychological comfort. He convened a meeting in the group briefing room at 2130 hours. The key players assembled: Captain Voss, Armament; Major William Calhoun, Operations; Captain Theodore Morrison, Assistant Armament; Lieutenant Colonel Donald Sheeler, Deputy Group Commander, and several squadron commanders. "Gentlemen," Ray began, "we have a situation. Sergeant Romano has installed an unauthorized modification to his tail guns. This modification violates multiple technical orders. It also produced 2 confirmed kills in this morning's mission, more than most tail gunners achieve in their entire tours. Captain Voss spoke first. Sir, regulations are clear. Unauthorized modifications to defensive armament are prohibited. If we allow one gunner to— Captain, Major Calhoun interrupted, what's our current tail gunner kill rate? Voss consulted his notes reluctantly. Approximately 8% hit probability. 8%. Calhoun let that sink in. And Romano achieved what today? His hit rate for this mission was approximately 22%, but that's a single data point. Nearly triple our average, Calhoun pressed, in one mission. The room erupted in debate. Engineers cited safety concerns. Untested modifications could fail catastrophically. Operations officers countered with casualty figures. They were losing bombers faster than replacements arrived. The discussion grew heated, voices rising. Colonel Ray let them argue for 20 minutes, then raised his hand for silence. Captain Morrison, how many bombers has this group lost in the past month? Morrison consulted his clipboard. 43 aircraft, sir. 17 to fighter attacks from the rear quarter. 43 B-17s. That's 430 American boys. And how many enemy fighters have our tail gunners shot down in that period? Confirmed kills, 11, sir. Ray nodded slowly. 43 of ours for 11 of theirs. He looked directly at Voss. Captain, your concern about regulations is noted and appropriate, but I'm more concerned about losing 43 crews a month because our defensive systems don't work. He turned to the room. Sergeant Romano's modification will remain installed for 3 more missions. We'll mount gun cameras to record every engagement. If his hit rate remains significantly above average, we'll consider group-wide implementation. If it fails, we'll remove it and discipline Romano for the violation. Voss started to protest, but Ray cut him off. That's my decision. However, he looked at the operations officers, I want engineering drawings of this modification, proper ones. If we're going to break regulations, we'll at least document it properly. As the meeting dispersed, Ray called Romano aside. The young sergeant stood at rigid attention, clearly expecting the worst. Sergeant, Ray said quietly, I flew bombers in the last war, lost a lot of good men to German fighters. You know what the worst part was? No, sir. Knowing that most of them died because our equipment wasn't good enough, because bureaucrats and engineers who'd never been shot at decided what we needed. He studied Romano carefully. Your modification stays. Don't make me regret this decision. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You've got 3 missions to prove this works. If your hit rate drops back to average, Captain Voss will have your stripes. Dismissed. The 3-mission test. Romano's next 3 missions would determine not just the fate of his modification, but potentially the survival rate of hundreds of bomber crews. Gun cameras were installed, recording every burst fired. The entire 91st Bomb Group held its breath. Mission 1, October 10th, 1943. Münster. The Luftwaffe responded to the American raid with devastating force. Over 200 German fighters attacked the bomber stream. Romano's section came under assault by a full staffel of FW-190s from JG-26, the notorious Abbeville Kids, and FW-190 Dove from 6 o'clock high. Romano tracked it through the reflector sight, watching his tracers in the mirrors, adjusting his aim in real time. His first burst struck the fighter's engine cowling. The BMW radial erupted in flames. The Focke-Wulf tumbled earthward, its pilot bailing out. 20 seconds later, another 190 approached from dead astern. Romano centered the reticle, fired a long burst, and watched his tracers walk across the fighter's fuselage. The cockpit shattered. The 190 nosed over and went straight down. Gun camera footage recorded both kills in stark detail. More importantly, it captured Romano's firing patterns. Instead of the wild, sweeping bursts typical of tail gunners, his fire was controlled, adjusted, accurate. The mirrors allowed him to correct aim while firing, something impossible with traditional sights. Final tally: 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable, 412 rounds expended. Mission 2, October 12, 1943, Bremen. The second test mission targeted submarine pens. Luftwaffe opposition was fierce but disorganized. German pilots, perhaps warned about improved tail defenses, attempted more oblique attacks. Romano's mirror system proved its worth here too. He could track fighters approaching from angles the standard sight couldn't cover. A Bf-109 attempted a climbing attack from 5 o'clock low. Romano spotted it in his left mirror, swung the guns over, and opened fire as it entered his reflector sight's field. The 109's wing root exploded. It spun wildly into the undercast. Later, 2 FW-190s attempted a coordinated attack. Romano engaged the first with his reflector sight while monitoring the second in his mirrors. He damaged the first, forcing it to break off, then shifted fire to the second, scoring hits on its tail section. Final tally: 1 confirmed kill, 2 damaged, 380 rounds expended. Mission 3, October 14, 1943, 2nd Schweinfurt. The third test came during one of the war's bloodiest air battles. The 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers, but Romano's aircraft survived, and his modification proved itself beyond doubt. 3 times fighters attacked from the rear quarter. 3 times Romano's mirror-assisted fire drove them off or destroyed them. His most spectacular success came when a Bf-110 night fighter, pressed into day's service, attempted a rocket attack from long range. Romano spotted the rocket launch in his mirrors, called a warning to his pilot, and then poured accurate fire into the twin-engine fighter as it closed. The 110's crew compartment disintegrated under the concentrated fire. But the mission showed the modification's limits too. During a head-on attack by FW-190s, Romano could only watch helplessly. His system improved rear defense, but couldn't change the tail position's limited forward field of fire. Final tally: 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable, 1 damaged, 405 rounds expended. The verdict. The statistics were undeniable. In 3 missions with the mirror reflector system, Romano had achieved 5 confirmed kills, 1 probable, 3 damaged. Average hit rate, 23.6%. Ammunition expenditure per kill, 284 rounds. This compared to the group average of hit rate, 8%. Ammunition per kill, approximately 2,800 rounds. Colonel Ray presented these figures to a packed briefing room on October 15th. Gentlemen, the numbers speak for themselves. Sergeant Romano's modification triples our tail gun effectiveness. I'm authorizing immediate installation across all group aircraft. Captain Voss made one last attempt. Sir, we still lack proper authorization from— Captain, Ray interrupted. I'll take full responsibility. If Wright Field wants to court-martial me for saving American lives, they're welcome to try. Frank Kellerman was put in charge of modification production. Within 24 hours, he'd established an assembly line in Hangar 3. Salvage teams scoured East Anglia for crashed P-47s with intact reflector sights. Sheet metal workers fabricated mirror brackets. By October 20th, 18 B-17s carried the Romano rig. The results were immediate. Luftwaffe loss reports from late October noted, enemy tail defensive fire has improved markedly. Attacks from rear quarter now sustain unacceptable casualties. Recommend revision of tactics. Recognition and expansion. Word of the Romano modification spread beyond the 91st Group. Gun camera footage circulated among bomber units. Tail gunners from other groups began appearing at Bassingbourn, begging for installation instructions. On November 18, 1943, Brigadier General Frederick Castle, commander of the 4th Bombardment Wing, arrived for an unscheduled inspection. Castle, who would later die leading the air battle over Liège, was known for his willingness to buck regulations when lives were at stake. He examined Romano's position personally, reviewed the gun camera footage, and interviewed both Romano and Kellerman. His conclusion was swift. This modification will be installed across the entire 4th Wing immediately. Sir, his aide protested, we don't have authorization from— Then get it, Castle snapped, and if they say no, do it anyway and blame me. By December 1943, the Field Expedient Tail Gun Aiming System Type 1 was installed on over 200 B-17s. The 8th Air Force officially acknowledged its existence while carefully avoiding mention of its unauthorized origins. Boeing engineers at the Cheyenne Modification Center, already working on an improved tail turret, incorporated Romano's reflector sight concept into their design. The impact was measurable. Tail attack losses decreased by 35% in groups equipped with the modification. German fighter pilots, facing accurate defensive fire, shifted tactics toward more dangerous head-on attacks. This, in turn, increased Luftwaffe losses and decreased their effectiveness. The human cost and final mission. Romano continued flying missions through February 1944, his personal tally reaching 7 confirmed kills. Exceptional for any gunner, remarkable for a tail position. But the war's arithmetic finally caught up with him on February 22nd during Big Week. Over Leipzig, flak severed hydraulic lines in Knockout Dropper's tail section. Hot fluid sprayed across Romano's position, making the guns slippery and filling the compartment with toxic fumes. He continued fighting, engaging fighters even as the bomber lost altitude. More flak punched through the tail, wounding Romano in the left shoulder and leg. Blood made the gun handles slick. Still he fought, shooting down an FW-190 that attempted to deliver a coup de grace to the wounded bomber. Knockout Dropper crashed, landed in Belgium, wheels up in a muddy field. Romano, weakened by blood loss and hydraulic fluid inhalation, was pulled from the tail section by Belgian resistance fighters. By the time German troops arrived, the Belgians had spirited away 3 of the crew, including Romano. The others were captured. Romano spent 6 weeks hidden in Belgian cellars, moved from house to house by the Comet Line escape network. His wounds became infected. Without proper medical treatment, fever and delirium set in. In late March, German security forces raided the safe house where he was recovering. Romano spent the remainder of the war in Stalag Luft III, Homecoming and Legacy. Michael Romano returned to Pittsburgh in June 1945, weighing 127 pounds, 18 pounds below his enlistment weight. The Army Air Forces awarded him the Distinguished Flying Cross, the citation carefully omitting any mention of unauthorized modifications. He also received the Purple Heart and Air Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters. Boeing had by then produced thousands of B-17Gs with the Cheyenne tail turret, incorporating reflector sight technology directly inspired by Romano's modification. The official history credited field testing and combat experience for the improvement. Romano's name appeared nowhere in the documentation. Romano himself showed no bitterness about the lack of recognition. When Boeing invited him to Seattle in 1946 to consult on defensive armament design, he politely declined. "I just fixed something that was broken," he told his wife. "Other people made it official." He returned to factory work, taking a job at Westinghouse Electric in East Pittsburgh. He married Rita Constantino in 1947, raised 3 children, and rarely spoke about the war. His daughter later recalled, "Dad would sometimes stare at planes flying overhead, moving his hands like he was aiming at something, but he never talked about what he'd done." The full impact of Romano's modification emerged only through post-war analysis. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey calculated that improved tail defenses saved approximately 840 B-17s and 8,400 crew members. Each of those men went home to families, had children, lived lives that statistically shouldn't have continued past 1943. The reunion and final years. In 1983, the 91st Bombardment Group Association held its 40th anniversary reunion at the old Bassingbourn Airfield, now an Army barracks. Romano, aged 60 and graying, attended reluctantly at his wife's insistence. In the officers' mess, now a museum, they'd mounted a restored B-17 tailgun position with a Romano modification installed. A placard read, "Field Expedient Sight System, invented by S. Sergeant Michael A. Romano, 1943, estimated to have saved over 800 aircraft." During the dinner, Frank Kellerman, now 78 and still sharp, stood to speak. "Most of you flew the missions, but I want to talk about a young sergeant who saw men dying because of bad equipment and decided to fix it. He risked court-martial to save lives. Mike Romano is the reason many of you are sitting here tonight instead of buried in some German field." The room erupted in standing ovation. Romano, deeply uncomfortable with attention, tried to remain seated until Rita physically pulled him to his feet. Tail gunners lined up to shake his hand, many with tears in their eyes. Gerald Hammond, who'd flown 31 missions with a Romano sight, said simply, "My grandchildren exist because of you. Thank you." Romano, embarrassed by the emotion, mumbled, "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Hammond replied firmly, "that's where you're wrong. Thousands of us faced the same problem, only you fixed it." Michelangelo. Romano died on March 8, 2003, age 79, in Pittsburgh. His obituary in the Post-Gazette mentioned his military service briefly. World War II veteran, 91st Bomb Group, 8th Air Force. It said nothing about mirrors and salvaged gun sites, about regulations broken and lives saved, about a factory kid who couldn't accept broken systems. At his funeral, his son found a box in the basement containing Romano's wartime logs, sketches of the modification, and hundreds of letters from bomber crew members thanking him for saving their lives. There was also a note from General Frederick Castle, dated December 1943. Sergeant Romano, your unauthorized modification has become authorized reality. Boeing tells me they're incorporating your sight system into production models. The Army Air Forces owes you a debt we can never repay. You saw a problem that killed men, and you fixed it despite the rules. That's the kind of initiative that wins wars. F.W. Castle, Brig Generous. Lessons learned. Romano's story offers timeless lessons about innovation, bureaucracy, and moral courage. Innovation comes from necessity, not committees. The Army Air Forces had entire departments dedicated to weapons development. Yet the solution to tail gunner ineffectiveness came from a high school dropout who simply couldn't accept watching friends die. Regulations serve purpose until they don't. Rules exist for good reasons: safety, standardization, accountability. But when regulations prevent solutions to life or death problems, moral courage demands breaking them. Field experience trumps theoretical knowledge. Engineers with advanced degrees designed the B-17's defensive system. A sergeant who'd actually used it in combat fixed it. Individual initiative matters. In vast military machines, individual contributions seem meaningless. Romano proved that one person recognizing a problem and insisting on solving it can save thousands. Credit doesn't matter. Results do. Romano never received official credit for his innovation. Boeing's histories don't mention him, but 8,400 men went home because a tail gunner wouldn't accept good enough. Epilogue: the sight that saved the 8th. Today, a restored B-17G sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Visitors can peer into the tail gunner's position and see the Cheyenne tail turret with its integrated reflector sight. Few realize they're looking at the descendant of an illegal modification cobbled together from salvaged parts on a cold October night in 1943. The museum's placard mentions improved sighting systems developed through combat experience. It doesn't mention Staff Sergeant Michael Romano, who refused to accept that American boys had to die because their gun sights didn't work. It doesn't mention Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman, who risked his career to build an unauthorized modification. It doesn't mention Colonel Stanley Ray, who chose saving lives over following regulations. But perhaps that's fitting. Romano himself never sought recognition. He saw a problem, fixed it, and went back to fighting the war. When asked years later why he risked court-martial to improve his gun sight, he gave the same simple answer: men were dying. In the end, that's all the justification needed. Men were dying because of inadequate equipment. One tail gunner decided that was unacceptable. His decision to break the rules saved more lives than most generals. His legacy lives not in museums or history books, but in the generations of Americans who exist because their grandfathers made it home from the war. The mirror sight modification stands as proof that sometimes the most important innovations come not from funded programs or official channels, but from individuals who see a problem and simply refuse to accept that it can't be fixed. In a world of regulations, bureaucracy, and official channels, Michael Romano reminds us that occasionally the greatest act of duty is knowing when to break the rules. Somewhere tonight, a descendant of a B-17 tail gunner is tucking their children into bed, reading them a story, continuing a family line that should have ended over Germany in 1943. They've probably never heard of Michael Romano, but they owe him everything. And perhaps that's the most fitting memorial of all, not statues or citations, but lives lived by people who never knew they were saved by a Pittsburgh factory worker who couldn't accept that a gun sight that didn't work was good enough. Romano wanted men to stop dying. He made it happen. Nothing else matters. In the arithmetic of war, where statistics measure horror and bureaucracies manage catastrophe, Michael Romano proved that one person can still make a difference. All it takes is the courage to see what's broken and the determination to fix it. Regulations be damned. The tail gunner who broke the rules to save lives died peacefully in his own bed, surrounded by family, having lived to see his great-grandchildren. Thousands of other Americans can say the same because Sergeant Romano looked at his gun sight one October night and said the most powerful words in the English language. "This doesn't work. I can make it better." And then he did. Please support this video with the like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. Goodbye, and see you all soon.